Their defense is a joke.
What it really comes down to is I would love to have either of them.
They don't have a prayer in their secondary. They have nothing.
So you're saying just don't draft Blunt?
I'm saying don't draft Blunt.
He was unbelievably efficient last year.
You know that they use their running backs in the passing game a ton.
I'm drafting him tonight.
That's Team Huevos. Huevos gigantes.
Hey everyone, welcome into the FantasyPros Football Podcast. I'm your host, Bobby Sylvester, joined as always by Mike Tagliere. Give us a follow on Twitter if you don't already. We're at BobbyFantasyPro and at Mike Tagliere NFL. Tags, what's going on, dude?
Nothing much. I'm just enjoying another Thursday. This week has kind of flown by. The days have kind of blended together, but I guess that's what happens when you get back from vacation.
Sure, yeah. You know what, Tags? I had a lot of people hating on me saying I was way too hard on you on the Does Tags Know Everything segment. It's supposed to be really hard, man. Were people like jerks to you about, you didn't know where Idaho was?
No, that's something that I should know more about, to be honest with you. And it's funny,
no, dude, it would get in the way of your fantasy football knowledge, man.
No, but one of the things in life that I regret, and I tell my daughter this all the time because she's in high school and she likes the same subjects that I did. And I'm like, history was one thing that I really didn't like when I was growing up. I didn't pay attention in there. I didn't pay attention to geography and all that stuff. And as I got older, I wished I had learned more about history. So I tell her, I'm like, trust me, it's something that you're going to want to know later in life because it's harder to retain that stuff as you get older. So. Yeah. I appreciate the poking and prodding, but yeah, I suck.
No, you're all good, man. You do know everything about fantasy football, and we have another guy who knows everything about fantasy football too. It's our guest today, Justin Boone. You can follow him on Twitter at his name, Justin Boone. He's the lead fantasy analyst at The Score and FantasyPros' most accurate expert for 2019 and top 10 in 7 of the last 8 seasons. Host of The Score Fantasy Football Podcast, Justin Boone. Justin, how you doing?
I'm doing good, and I gotta say, nobody knows everything about fantasy football. We're trying our hardest, but even the most accurate people, it ends up being, 60-70% of the time, I think. It's nobody at 100% at this point.
Right. So, okay, guys, we're going to be talking about running backs today, and we're just going to take an early look at ECR. That's our expert consensus rankings, where you mash all the analysts in the industry together and say, this is what the analysts recommend as a whole. And I want to figure out what Tags and Justin think are the guys that are way too high in ECR and the guys that are way too low in ECR. Again, this is just the running backs. First, though, I want to tell you about our cheat sheet creator. It is so easy to use, guys. The convenience of being able to import rankings from anywhere on the web or even a spreadsheet is just golden. It saves you hours of your time when you're prepping for your drafts. It's really useful to be able to combine multiple expert rankings into a consensus cheat sheet. That way you can say, oh, I love Justin Boone, Sean Corner, Mike Tagliere, Bobby Sylvester, and you mash this all into one group of rankings, and then you've got your own war room of experts in there with you. You can also export your rankings to Excel or use them in both our draft simulator and draft assistant tools. You can check out our cheat sheet creator at fantasypros.com/draftwizard. fantasypros.com/draftwizard. All right, you guys, you ready to get into this?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right, so we're going to start with Tags. And Tags, I want you to give me one name that is just way too high in ECR right now.
I'm going to start with Austin Ekeler. This is considered, I think by many, it's considered a hot take for me to say that, considering what he did last year, but there's just too much changing on this team for me to like him very much. I mean, you have, it's either Tyrod Taylor or Justin Herbert. We don't know who's going to be under center in week 1, but I would assume that it's going to be Tyrod Taylor. Tyrod Taylor, going back to his Bills days when he started, he did not throw the ball a whole lot, and this is a team that's not going to throw the ball 600 times per year like they did with Phillip Rivers, no matter who is under center, and that is a big blow to someone like Austin Ekeler because he actually had more points through the air than Christian McCaffrey did last year. Not many people know that. He actually set the record for most half PPR fantasy points through the air. The touchdown rate was through the roof, but he scored, I think it was like 73% of his fantasy points through the air. So if you take back and you cut, 33% of those pass attempts out, if they go down to like a 450 attempt team, that's a big blow to his value. He's not someone that's going to carry the ball 15 to 20 times in the ground. They drafted Joshua Kelly. They have Justin Jackson. This offense is not going to be as high scoring as it used to be. And regardless about Phillip Rivers and how people feel about how he played last year, defenses do not have to come into the game and respect someone like Justin Herbert or Tyrod Taylor through the air. So you're going to see a lot more stacked boxes against Austin Ekeler. I feel fine about him as a middling RB2 that he still should receive somewhere around 13, 14, 15 touches per game, but this is not the offense that is going to produce a top 10 running back.
So, Justin, I get it. The Austin Eckler is going to be splitting the touches with probably not a full split, but Josh Jackson and Joshua Kelly are both going to get some touches as well. But are they going to get more touches combined than Melvin Gordon did last year? Austin Eckler finished as the fantasy RB number 6.
I think they're going to be right up there because I don't think that they want. I like Tags is saying. I don't think that they want to load Eckler up and make him this bell cow guy. And I think they've made that fairly clear by their moves, right? Sometimes actions speak louder than words, and bringing in another running back. They also continue to talk up Justin Jackson.
He's awesome.
At one point, Anthony Lynn said he thought he might be the best all-around back in the team or something
right,
like that.
Baby. He is.
Yeah, he had a really high praise for him. So I think that's what's going to happen. And I think the one thing, too, to factor in here, they've also said they want to play good defense, and man, that defense looks loaded now. Yep.
Yes.
They want to play good defense. They want to slow the game down. Last year, it was one of the slowest paced offenses in the league, if not the slowest. And they're going to continue to do that. That's the way to win, especially if you have Tyrod Taylor under center.
So, Tags, his ECR right now, Austin Eckler, is number 12. Yep. I've got him down at number 15 as well. I'm with you. How low do you have him?
I have at 18. Like I said, middle of the road RB2. I have him sandwiched right around Melvin Gordon territory. Obviously, with Denver, he's going to share some carries with Phillip Lindsay. It's going to be, again, I just worry, and we didn't even talk about the fact they lost their starting left tackle there. I know they added Brian Bulaga to play right tackle, which should help, but
and they got Turner.
I'm not excited about owning pieces on that team, even when it comes to, like, I was looking at strength of schedule in terms of like how I do it just the other day, and I saw Mike Williams has a good schedule, but I'm just not excited about the offense. I just don't. Going back to last year, Bobby, we talked about Aaron Jones as a guy that we really felt like he could break out, and I said that I felt like he could be a first round pick in 2020. He was trending that way, and now all of a sudden we have Matt LaFleur doing Matt LaFleur things, and he's falling a little bit, but it worked out in terms of, like, you find those guys that are tied to high potentially high volume and high scoring offenses. I don't know if Eckler's going to have either of those. So
agree.
That's where my concern's at with him.
Yep, I agree with that. I'm going to be drafting a ton of Justin Jackson just in case he does end up taking over that job. I think it's a possibility. Justin, before we move on to your next guy, where do you have Eckler ranked?
I have him as a high-end RB2, and I think that's still where he belongs, and that's one of the funny things. When you're talking about guys in the top 20 or so, you're not going to have that much variation, and maybe that's just me. Maybe that's just the way I rank because I'm not really a hot take kind of guy, right? I'm not going to have that guy that, is the 20th running back, and I have him number 1 overall or something like that, but I don't see, it's fairly chalky in those first probably 15 backs. You can have a guy maybe move 1 or 2 spots one way. But I still see Eckler as an RB2, and that seems to be where we all have him.
This might be a hot take. Bobby, this might be a hot take, and I want to ask Justin. I would take Jonathan Taylor before I'd take Austin Eckler.
See, Taylor, and this is a great segue, is one of my guys who is actually, I think, undervalued at this point.
Same.
And he keeps moving up my rankings as we go. It seems there's a few guys like that, and I don't know if you guys like this too, but every time I look at the rankings, there's a couple guys that I just keep moving down, and there's a couple guys that I just keep moving up, and it's like I can't stop myself every time I open the rankings, which is every single day, and maybe even during this podcast, I'll be moving guys around. We'll see what happens. But for Taylor, there is definitely a possibility where he could end up above Eckler in my rankings soon because in my mind, you're combining the best pure runner in this draft class with arguably the best offensive line in the league. And you have Taylor, who was this workhorse at Wisconsin, averaged more than 2,000 rushing yards per season. Maybe that's going to hurt him long-term as far as, his NFL outlook goes. But in year one, that's not going to be a problem. We know he's got the speed, 4.39 in the 40. What it's really going to come down to for him is how much he's going to be involved in the passing game.
Right.
And I'll admit, I'm not that confident he's going to have a huge passing game role. He didn't get a lot of passing opportunities in college until his senior year. I didn't think he looked that bad when he finally did. I know he had some drops. They were a bit of an issue, but I didn't think he looked completely out of place. You have the coaching staff that keeps talking up Naheem Hines and saying he's going to have a big role in the receiving game, but I don't think that Taylor needs a huge role in the receiving game to return value where he's going, which is sort of in that low-end RB2 range. I have him maybe closer to that middle range of the RB2s. My current projection for him, 254 carries, 1,143 rushing yards, 9 touchdowns, just 13 receptions for 97 yards. So a very minimal role as a pass catcher. But I mean, last year, Derrick Henry had 18 catches, 206 yards, and he had a couple of touchdowns receiving. So even if you're looking at my projection for Taylor, it still allows Hines to have the same numbers he had last year, maybe an expanded role in the passing game. It still leaves over 100 carries for Marlon Mack. I think we all would agree he's still going to be at least a little bit involved in that offense. And I think this offense as a whole in Indy is going to be more productive with Phillip Rivers at the helm. At worst, they're going to sustain more drives. So with their defense getting a little better, Vegas has their win total a little higher than last year. It's up at 8.5, 9 games this season. So you figure they're going to win more, means better game scripts for that rushing attack. So my projection for Taylor puts him around RB16, RB17,
Nice.
maybe even a little bit higher. And I think that's conservative when you look at those numbers. I think he could easily get up to 1,300, 1,400 yards from scrimmage, maybe more, even into double-digit scores. So I'm happy to take him in the third round where his ADP is right now.
His ECR right now is RB19, right between Chris Carson, Melvin Gordon, Le'Veon Bell, David Johnson. That's about where I've got him ranked, but now I'm looking at consensus projections, and they've got Jonathan Taylor just touching the ball 210 times. I mean, that's the consensus around the industry. He's touching the ball at least 250, right, Justin?
I sure believe so.
I mean, if he stays healthy.
Yeah, for where they took him, for the type of player he is, like when we're looking at this class, and we just spent months looking at these rookies and getting so excited about them, we're not going to continue to be excited about Jonathan Taylor after going to an offense that has this phenomenal offensive line. It's almost the perfect setup for him. I'm very excited about him this season.
I mean, Marlon Mack had 260 touches in just 14 games last year. They want to use their RB1, and Taylor's going to be it, right, Tegs?
Yeah, he is. And that's the thing. Remember last year we had this conversation. I said, what's the difference between taking Le'Veon Bell in the first round or going down to the third round and getting someone like Leonard Fournette or Chris Carson?
Right.
I liked Aaron Jones there too. I feel like, what is the difference between Jonathan Taylor and Nick Chubb? Nick Chubb doesn't play behind as good as an offensive line, okay? His offense is dealing with a new head coach. We have no idea how that's going to work out. He has a better running back alongside him. You could argue that Kareem Hunt is a better receiver than Nick Chubb. Nick Chubb's good in the receiving game. I like Nick Chubb as a running back. I really do. But Kareem Hunt, we can't pretend that he's not going to hurt his value. So What is the difference between Nick Chubb and Jonathan Taylor? One plays behind the top offensive line maybe in all of football, and there is nothing that Marlon Mack does better than Jonathan Taylor. I'm sorry, there's not. Nyheim Hines, that's a bunch of crap. And I say that because you go back to last year when they dealt with injuries to Marlon Mack, and they went to Jonathan Williams before using Nyheim Hines in a big role. He's not the player that they wanted him to be. He's a very situational role guy. It's like a lesser version of Tariq Cohen. He's not going to have any impact on what Jonathan Taylor does extremely well. Marlon Mack's the biggest speed bump, and if he can't get over Marlon Mack, I mean, that's a real problem.
Yeah, the difference between those two is that we just haven't seen Taylor do it in the pros yet. That's the difference, right?
Correct.
But how many times do we just let rookies fall this late in drafts before we realize, okay, if you draft a running back in the top 50 picks, he's going to get all these touches?
Yes, that's why I did an article basically on that saying, if a running back's drafted in the first round, what do they average carry-wise? Do they get carries their first year, second round, third round, fourth round? Once you get into the third and fourth rounds, those guys are not guaranteed a large role. But Jonathan Taylor was taken at the top of the second round. I'm anticipating, just like Justin, I anticipate 250 plus carries for him this year.
Yeah.
He may not be involved a whole lot in the passing game, but I would still say around 20 receptions is pretty, I would say is doable for him. So yeah, I mean, I like him. I have him as my RB14.
I mean, Marlon Mack did that last year, and guess what? He finished RB20 while missing 2 games. If we think Taylor's a better version of him, he's going to finish above RB20.
Yep, I could see 1,200 rushing yards this year.
All right, Tags, we're going to keep it going the same way we started, okay? You give me one more guy. Actually, we're going to do a couple more. You give me another guy who you think ECR is too high on.
Well, Nick Chubb is one of those guys that I brought him up on purpose just because if you look at like the first 10 games of last year before Kareem Hunt was actually on the team and taking part in games, Nick Chubb was the number 4 running back in PPR and half PPR formats in points per game. And then once Kareem Hunt joined the team, we saw that change drastically. Chubb still got a lot of carries. He was still getting, upwards of 18 carries per game, but he was not getting any work in the passing game. And you saw because of that, from the point that Kareem Hunt joined the team, he was the number 18 running back in fantasy football in half PPR formats, whereas Kareem Hunt was the number 26 running back. So seeing him drafted as the number 8 running back right now doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me because, yes, I do anticipate the Browns taking a step forward as a team, but a lot of that is going to go through the passing game when it comes to Baker Mayfield taking a step forward and getting back on track with his career. Odell Beckham bouncing back from a terrible year. They signed Austin Hooper. They still have David Njoku, who he basically wasn't playing at all last year either. So there's a lot of mouths to feed there, and Nick Chubb is going to be splitting that workload. So when you take a running back as a top 8 guy, I feel like it should be a can't miss pick. And not to say that Chubb is not good. He is very good. I'd say he's a top 10 running back in football, but we're talking about opportunity. I would much rather have someone like Kenyan Drake on my fantasy football team than Nick Chubb.
Nick Chubb is someone I will have 0 shares of. Here's the 5 guys who were closest to him in fantasy points per game from the time Kareem Hunt came back. Raheem Mostert, going way later. Devonta Freeman, he doesn't even have a team. Marlon Mack lost his job. Darius Geis, is he the starter? James White. Adrian Peterson is another one. I mean, that's not good territory to be in. Are you going to have any shares of Nick Chubb, Justin?
I absolutely am. This is one where
Are you okay?
I hear all the arguments, and I think you guys are right about that stuff, but I'm basing it on talent, and like Tag said, Chubb is absolutely one of the most talented backs in the league, and also that you're having this new coaching staff come in. You're going to have that Minnesota Vikings kind of offense that we saw last year. I think the bigger problem in the Browns offense is going to be the receivers and whether that volume is going to be there, whether they're going to be able to support Odell Beckham and Jarvis Landry. And Landry, we'll see if he's going to be healthy at the beginning of the season, but whether they're going to be able to support all of those guys, because I think this offense is going to go through that running attack like it did a couple years ago. And when that happens, I think both Hunt and Chubb could be pretty valuable, that you could have Chubb put up numbers, maybe it'll be low-end RB1 numbers and not, top 5, but I still think he belongs up there. And you could have Chubb sneaking into maybe that back end of the RB2 range potentially, just because of how much that offense is going to revolve around the rushing attack.
Yeah, and I have Chubb at number 12, so I'm in line with that, about like a low end, high end, like right on that teetering on that range, just because the guys behind him, Jonathan Taylor, we still have a few question marks. We talked about those. Josh Jacobs doesn't play for a great offense. They're not using him in the passing game like they should. You could argue about Leonard Fournette in that range, I guess. Todd Gurley. Those are the guys that I'd consider in that range. So you could talk me
Aaron
into
Jones over him.
What's that?
I'm taking Aaron Jones over him still. Kenyan Drake.
I don't know. It's tough for me to trust Matt LaFleur with what he does with his football teams. I mean, I
fantasy number 2 running back last year, man.
I feel like Matt LaFleur is the new Adam Gase, and I say that.
No.
I'm serious though. Like, think about how many people said that Adam Gase was a good coach because of what he did with Peyton Manning. Do you think that the Green Bay Packers would have been anywhere close to 13-3 last year without Aaron Rodgers? The answer is absolutely not.
Oh no.
So, if you were to put him in a different situation like you did with the Titans, I didn't even know why he got a job as a head coach. When the Packers hired him, I was like, why are people excited about this? Like, I didn't think he was a good offensive coordinator with the Titans, and obviously that's clear now that we've seen what they did without him. So I'm not excited. I love Aaron Jones, the player. I really do. And I think in Dynasty, I think he's a good enough football player that has minimal touches on his frame where he's going to get another deal, like a 3-year deal. So I think in Dynasty, you could actually be buying up Aaron Jones right now. He's phenomenal. He's a stud. But I am worried about this offense in terms of like how they're going to distribute touches, if he's going to be consistent. And because of that, I have him in RB2 territory.
So, guys, somebody going in this range a little bit higher is Alvin Kamara, and we're giving away a signed Alvin Kamara Saints helmet. If you guys want to check it out, sign up for that contest. It's really easy to do. It takes about 30 seconds. All you need to do is go to iTunes or Stitcher, go to Apple Podcast or Stitcher, leave us an honest review. Let us know what you think about the podcast, how we can improve, what we're doing right, just so we can make the best product for you guys. Then take a screenshot of that review and send it to us at contest@fantasypros.com. If you want to check out the details, see what this bad boy looks like, you can go to fantasypros.com/contest. All right, so let's keep moving on here. And Justin, we're going to go back to you for somebody that you think is undervalued right now, someone you want to get your hands on when you look at ECR and where these guys are likely going to be drafted.
I mean, there are so many. I mean, one guy, and it's kind of interesting to me, it might be more of a controversial take on this one, but everyone seems to be down on Devin Singletary. And I get it from the standpoint that maybe people were excited that he was going to be a workhorse. And
he was never going to be a workhorse, though. Tags is about to fight you, by the way. Tags is so mad that you said this.
Well, not mad. I think you're making a great point there, though, Bobby, is that I don't think he was ever going to be a workhorse.
I mean, if you have Frank Gore there and Frank Gore's taking touches, like, of course they don't trust him to be that guy.
Right. So I'm not that worried about Zach Moss, and I don't know, maybe Tags feels differently about Zach Moss, but I'm not worried about Zach Moss stealing this job or even stealing the bulk of the touches there. So Moss is going to prevent him from becoming any sort of workhorse, but Brandon Beane came out and said, I thought he made it pretty clear after the draft. When he talked about Moss, he said, quote, I think more of a goal line and things like that, as we did with Frank Gore last year, you'll see Zach do. I think Devin will do similar to the role that he had. Similar to the role that he had, well, last year, he would have been a top 15 back had he been healthy all season. He put up nearly 1,000 yards from scrimmage, had 192 touches in 12 games. He got hurt early in the year. That's what prevented him from going all the way there. And really, when you look at what he was on pace for, 201 carries, 1,033 rushing yards, 3 rushing touchdowns, 39 receptions, 259 receiving yards, and 3 receiving touchdowns. Those numbers would have allowed Gore to still see well over 100 touches on the year, which is more of what I have Moss projected for this season. And then if you have Moss involved, you have Josh Allen still continuing to vulture scores near the goal line, which he was also doing last year. Singletary can pick up where he left off. He has his complimentary back next to him. Nothing changes, and that makes him a top 20 fantasy back still.
This is interesting, Tags. I can't wait to hear what you have to say because I know you're a big Zach Moss fan.
Yeah, I mean, I love Zach Moss as a player, and if he's healthy, he's really good. And he's obviously a better version of Frank Gore at this point in their careers. And, when you invest a third-round pick like they did on Zach Moss, they clearly feel a certain way about him because he was a guy that everybody thought he'd fall to day 3 because of the injury concerns with him, but he's a very bruising running back. He's a guy that is willing to dish out punishment. He's a better goal line running back, and this all comes back to that, where if you're drafting a running back, you need him to score touchdowns in fantasy football. You can get, 15 touches all you want, but if you're not scoring touchdowns, it doesn't really matter. And Devin Singletary last year in the role that we're talking about, that Brandon Beane talked about saying he's going to have a similar role to the one he had last year, he got 2 carries inside the 5-yard line last year, the entire season. Josh Allen led that team in carries. Frank Gore had like 5 times as many as Singletary. So Zach Moss is going to come in and steal those opportunities. Beane did mention that about the goal line. I like Devin Singletary as a player. He's fine. But when you're number 3 in the pecking order for goal line carries, that is going to crush your fantasy value. So basically,
well, limit your upside for sure. But like if he retains his role where he's going to get 200 touches,
right? And that's what I'm saying. So if we talk about look at Le'Veon Bell. Let's use him as an example. Last year, he was a guy that continually got opportunity. He continually, he was always around that 60 to 100 yard mark, but he never scored touchdowns. I think he had 3 rushing touchdowns all season. Was he a guy that you wanted to rely on for, middling RB2 production all season? No. Ideally, he would have been like a very low-end RB2, high-end RB3 on your fantasy team. He delivered that floor, but you are not going to win a fantasy championship because you have Devin Singletary on your team, and that's my concern. I would rather take someone in that territory that can break out. Someone like, we looked at Aaron Jones last year. He was that guy that was going, 3rd, 4th round a lot of times. Devin Singletary is going to go in that 4th round range. I would rather take someone that has league-winning upside at that point at running back.
Like an Aaron Jones from last year. So who is that for you, Tex? Who would you rather have in this range than Singletary?
I honestly believe that I think David Montgomery is someone I would take over Singletary. If the Bears offense does take a step forward, Montgomery
He's probably going to get 120 more touches than Singletary.
That's where
but their offensive line is just trash, man. I don't see any upside for either of these guys.
That's the thing. And even with the Le'Veon Bell comparison, right, when you're talking about a team like that didn't win very many games last year versus the Bills who did. And I think when you talk about Moss getting drafted in the 3rd, one thing else to look at the Bills, they don't have a lot of gaps on that team. When you look at voids that they were trying to fill in the draft, there's not that many. I know for a long time the Bills were a laughingstock, but right now that team is pretty solid on both sides of the ball. So they were in a position where they could take a bit of a luxury pick and fill a hole, which Frank Gore did leave a hole. It wasn't a starting running back hole, but they needed a backup to come in there. And really, I guess, Tags, what it comes down to is how we view Moss, because I profile Moss more as he seemed more like an average back to me than he did a guy who was going to come in and be a difference maker in the pros. I saw some people comparing him to potentially be a Le'Veon Bell type back in the NFL.
No.
Listen, if he comes in and after year 1 does what Le'Veon Bell did and completely reshapes his body, and maybe at that point, but this year I don't see that happening for him. So I guess that's probably where we're coming to a big difference on that.
Here's my problem with Devin Singletary, because I like a lot of the things you're saying, Justin, but who are you taking him over? Right now in ECR, he's number 24 behind Mark Ingram, James Conner, David Johnson, Le'Veon Bell, Jonathan Taylor. Which of those guys are you taking him over?
Well, right now I have him over Bell. I have him over Mark Ingram, James Conner, Swift. I have him over Montgomery, Raheem Mostert, all those guys I have just below him. And it would not surprise me. I mean, there's also guys above him that we got questions about, right? David Johnson. I like David Johnson still. I think he's going to get a lot of volume there, but we don't know. Are the wheels falling off a little bit for him? Melvin Gordon, I think, is probably going to be better than people realize in that Broncos offense, but he's somebody else that changing teams, A lot of questions we don't know about. Chris Carson with the hip injury. Maybe we'll talk about a guy that plays with him, Rashad Penny, a little bit later, as somebody who I think is being overvalued pretty massively right now.
Yeah.
But just recently, things have maybe started to change with the reports that have come out about Devonta Freeman and Carlos Hyde potentially being of interest to the Seahawks there. But there's guys in front of him as well that I could see him move above.
Tags, why don't you give us another name that you think is overvalued right now?
Overvalued. I mean, I already mentioned Aaron Jones, so I'll move on to Chris Carson. Carson's someone that I'm worried about coming off a hip injury. That concerns me a lot more than an ACL does. ACLs or whatever. Chris Carson's been fumbling all over the place. We obviously know that. And they wanted to share the workload with him and Rashad Penny. We saw that before Rashad Penny got hurt. I think it was in week 16, 15, something like that. He had 33 touches in the 2 games prior to that, where Chris Carson was around the same territory. So it was almost a 50-50 split in that backfield. And then we heard rumors that they were talking about drafting a running back high in the draft, and it was like, wait, really? You guys just did the same thing with Rashad Penny. And then they take DJ Dallas, and that wasn't until the 4th round, but still, that shows that they definitely wanted to look into running back. And now we're hearing reports that they've already offered Devonta Freeman a contract, so they're clearly worried about Chris Carson to the point where I'm not drafting him with any equity. If I can take him like where the risk reward is worth it, but coming off the board where he is, which is the 17th running back, so you're talking about maybe the end of the 3rd round, beginning of the 4th. That's just too pricey for me for a guy that might be cut back on his workload, maybe not be nearly as efficient, especially when we know he's a power back. He's a guy that relies on dishing out those hits, breaking those tackles, and if he has a hip injury, that can flare up again because he chose not to have surgery on it. So there's a lot of worries for me with Chris Carson, whereas last year I loved him as a value. This year, not so much.
He did outscore. Sorry, go ahead.
I was big on him really all offseason until this week, and I'll tell you why, because yesterday I did an interview on my podcast, the Score Fantasy Football Podcast, with Dr. Edwin Porras. He works for Fantasy Points, the new site there, and I told him, I set up the question as looking at Rashad Penny and the fact that I didn't understand why everyone was still excited about Rashad Penny or had him ranked as high, because it seemed to me like he wasn't going to start the season, and that maybe Chris Carson was a guy who should be valued a little bit higher, and he kind of shot that down a little bit. He was very worried about that hip injury, saying there's not a lot of data on it, that it's not something you can feel really confident about. And then when you add to that, and it happened while we were talking, right after the podcast, it came out about Devonta Freeman and Carlos Hyde. And I mean, a couple weeks ago, it was Marshawn Lynch, right, that his agent had talked to the Seahawks. So all that stuff trickling out now, I think people are going to start to realize that both these backs, it's a pretty scary situation, because I know I keep looking down on Penny here, but you have a guy that got hurt, had an ACL tear in the final month of the year, and it was more than an ACL tear, right? He also had the meniscus surgery, and this was something Dr. Porras talked about as well. I recommend, I'm going to do a terrible job of explaining it here. I recommend go listen to the podcast, because he had all this great information on all these players who were injured this year. But looking at it, because of the 2 injuries that he had together, he explained that when you have the meniscus surgery, it prevents you from rehabbing the ACL for 4 to 6 weeks. So that puts the ACL timeline a little further back as well. And you have somebody in Pete Carroll who's almost always optimistic, but even he hinted at the fact that Penny might start the season on PUP. So when you add all that together, there's value to be had in that Seahawks backfield, but I don't know that we can be confident in any of them right now.
Right. I love Chris Carson. I love watching him run. But with the fumble issues, Penny getting all those touches at the end of the season before he got hurt, it makes me really nervous. I probably won't have many shares. Although, Tags, he did outscore Alvin Kamara last year and Joe Mixon. He was an RB1.
Oh, I'm well aware of what he did. Like, he was a value. He was one of those guys that I remember being at my home league draft, and I took Juju Smith-Schuster in the middle of the 2nd round, and Fournette and Carson and Aaron Jones were still on the board. And I was like, oh, one of them is going to fall back to me in the middle of the 3rd. But unfortunately, everybody in my home league looks at my rankings and whatever, and they were all gone. And I was mad because I thought Carson would at least be one that would be there, but he didn't even fall there. So he was someone I was targeting a lot. I know you loved Carson last year, but this year there's just too much risk surrounding him.
Agree. Yep, I won't have many shares of Carson. Let's go to another one, Justin, that you think is undervalued, and then we'll flip sides and we'll be talking about the ones that Justin thinks are overvalued and Tags thinks are undervalued. So, Justin, who's
I
your
was
last
gonna say,
guy?
I haven't got a chance on any of
Yeah,
the undervalued
we'll
guys.
flip it around.
Let me be a little negative on some of these guys. No, we'll go a couple more that I'm pretty positive about. And Anthony McFarlane is one of them.
Yes,
I know
let's go, Justin. All right, baby.
Well, in our dynasty draft, I was trying to trade back up to get him, and then when Jordan Love fell, I was like, I gotta take a quarterback. I need quarterbacks, and it was the third round. I was like, and then I even tried to trade back again to get anyway, but I didn't get him. So he's a player though that I think not just beyond this year, not just in dynasty, but potentially even this year could have a bigger role than some people realize. And it really comes down to James Conner's durability. And I know, the coaching staff has tried to talk him up. We got Mike Tomlin out here saying, he loves a featured guy. And he had that recent quote where he said, Conner is a featured and proven runner when healthy. When healthy. That's the whole part of that you got to take away. When healthy. He's just never healthy, right? He's missed a ton of games, 11 games during his 3-year career, failed to finish a few others. And going back, not that I'm going to keep referencing it, but we're talking about another injured guy here. Dr. Porras pointed out on the podcast, he talked about all the connective tissue injuries that are adding up for Conner. The MCL surgery that he had in 2017, it was apparently a very rare version of that surgery. Not many players get that, so it kind of puts him behind the 8-ball long term as well, he mentioned. And he thought the only way for Conner to finish a full season at this point might be with reduced volume. So when you look at last year, of his 10 appearances, he only played 60% of the snaps 4 times in those appearances. He was under that in 6 of those games. So you have those other backs working into the mix. Now you have them go out and get McFarlane. I know he wasn't a high pick whatsoever, but he could be a nice complementary option, and he has 3-down ability. So he could take over if or when Conner goes down. And if Conner walks after this year, there's an outside shot that McFarlane could be his replacement. And right now, you can get him basically at the end of every draft you're doing.
Do you think he's the number 2 instead of Snell or Jalen Samuels?
I think at the start of the season, it depends what we're going to get out of training camp in the preseason, but I think at the start of the season, they'll all still be battling for that, but I think he'll eventually emerge as that number 2, yeah.
Tags, he was one of my favorite running backs in the draft class, you know that, and you look at him and it's like, man, this guy's tiny. But I dare you guys, go look at his film and then go back and look at Ray Rice at Rutgers and spot the difference. If you find the difference, you tell me on Twitter at BobbyFantasyPro. This guy is remarkable. When he has the ball in his hands.
I like McFarlane. I have him 10 or 11 spots higher than ECR, so I don't have him crazy high. I think he's a handcuff is what he is. But he reminded me of like Chris Thompson. Actually, he was my comp coming out of college. I think he's a little bit bigger, but that's the kind of the role that I see him moving into. And I think it would be a great compliment to Conner because you don't want to give Conner 20 plus touches per game. You don't. He's going to break down. But McFarlane, I could see him having a role right out of the gate, and I think they've already moved on from Jalen Samuels. And you saw that as the year went on last year. They kind of plugged him in when Conner got hurt, and he really struggled in that role. And then they started going to Benny Snell, who was fine as a plotter, a Sean Green type running back, if you will.
Right.
But drafting McFarlane 3rd round, I think it was, if I'm not mistaken, that's where he was drafted. They clearly felt the need to improve that backfield. So I like him. I don't want to draft him like thinking I'm going to start him or anything like that. But I definitely do have. I'm with Justin in the fact that I think he's undervalued in ECR right now.
ECR 63 right now.
I wasn't suggesting at all that you should draft him and put him in your starting.
Right.
But he's on that list of guys, and I'm with you, Tags. I think I have him about 14 spots ahead of ECR in my rankings. So
me too.
But he's right in that mix, sort of just behind all those top backups. And really, I could throw those guys in there as guys that are being undervalued as well. The Alexander Madisons and Tony Pollard, Latavius Murray, Chase Edmonds. I think all those guys, when you look at ECR, and I don't normally do that often, but I did for this episode, when you look at that, I think all those guys are 5 to 10 spots too low right now.
I agree. And I say that every single episode, so everyone at home is laughing right now. But McFarlane's going after guys like Malcolm Brown. No upside. A.J. Dillon, Jamal Williams, Adrian Peterson, Boston Scott. What are you going to get out of those guys? Anthony McFarlane behind this offensive line could go nuts.
Boston Scott.
Well, that's what it comes down to at a certain point in the draft. And I think when you're doing rankings, it might be different from when you're actually drafting. But at a certain point in the draft, when you get to the 9th or 10th round or later, and your receiver core is probably filled out at that point, and if you're smart, you're probably going to wait on quarterback and even potentially tight end this year. You want pure upside. And the guys with the most upside, the guys who could have an immediate impact, all they need is that starter to go down, are those top-end backups, the guys who were very confident that they're going to be the handcuff to that starter, and it's the guys that I just mentioned.
All right, we're going to flip it around here in just a second. Actually, Justin, did you have any more guys that you wanted to add before we did this?
For Undervalued?
Yeah.
Another one, and it's sort of in the same vein as McFarland, is Antonio Gibson, actually. And he's not somebody that I was very high on during the draft process.
Great landing spot.
Yeah, it's more about the landing spot. I don't know even if we want to say it's a great landing
spot.
Well,
I mean, he has a chance for touches.
Right, exactly. It's a wide open landing spot for sure. Not somebody, like I said, that I'm overly sold on, and I think it's silly that Ron Rivera is going to come out and say, he has the same skill set as Christian McCaffrey, and people go wild. He's not Christian McCaffrey. That's just absolutely ridiculous. People, they need to read, more when they're looking at quotes and stuff. And I talk about this on our podcast sometimes. People that just read headlines, and it goes for more than just sports. Stop just reading headlines. Click on the article. Go read all the quotes. Go read the context. Man. You have to take all that stuff away. Yeah. And, sometimes I know when we're blurbing things and, you're trying to get that, quick information out on Twitter, sometimes people just take that and run with it. But you got to do a little more research into stuff. But for Gibson, what is there in that backfield right now? You have Darius Geis, who I hate talking about him because it makes me feel awful every time his name comes up because he's been cursed ever since he came into the league. And at this point, I don't think
he doesn't look the same either.
You can't trust at this point that he is going to become some workhorse back in that offense, that he's going to, turn into the breakout that maybe we thought he was going to be a year or two ago. So then you look at what else is there. Adrian Peterson,
who never goes away. He's never going to go away.
He still looks good on tape, by the way. I like Adrian
just
Peterson.
Keep battling it out forever.
Yeah.
Bryce Love, and they brought in
J.D. McKissick.
Barber and J.D. McKissick.
Not just the carries, but I mean, who's going to stop him from getting a bunch of targets? They could just put Antonio Gibson in the slot. He'd be great.
So I think he's a guy that you could grab, and once again, you can grab him so late. He might even go undrafted in some leagues, but you can grab him so late in drafts. And he's somebody that I think the kind of player that we could see, and once again, I keep saying if there's a preseason, but we could see in August, he makes a couple explosive plays in the preseason, and all of a sudden his ADP starts to skyrocket.
Right.
So if your draft is before that, try to take advantage and get him on your team now.
If Kyle Yates was on this podcast, he would be so excited right now with you talking about Antonio Gibson and Anthony McFarland, who he drafted in our Expert Dynasty League. Tags, we're going to turn it around right now, and why don't you give us some guys that you think are undervalued?
Well, I want to start it, and it's only a 2-spot difference, but I think it's massive in terms of overall because it's 2-spot running back difference. Kenyan Drake is a guy that I believe should be the 7th or 8th running back off the board. I could actually make the argument that he should go as high as the 6th running back off the board. So if you land him in the 2nd round of your draft, you are doing phenomenal. He's an RB1 this year, as far as I'm concerned. When he joined the Cardinals offense last year, he was the RB4 for the remainder of the season. They've only added weapons to that offense. The offensive line got better. Kyler Murray should get better, improve. It's year 2 in that offense. There's a lot of reasons I like Drake, and it's basically Aaron Jones from last year.
That's what I was going to ask.
He's my Aaron Jones this year. A guy that I'll probably own in every league if I'm able to get him at the beginning of the 2nd round. I'll take him there every time. But again, I wanted to bring him up, and it's not like it's a major crazy difference, but I think that makes a difference at the top of your draft because anybody that's drafting towards the turn, you kind of have to hit on a running back there because you're missing out on the top tier guys like McCaffrey, Barkley, Zeke, Kamara, Dalvin Cook, and then if forced to it, I might choose Drake over someone like Derrick Henry because I think he's going to offer more stability in your fantasy lineup, especially if you're playing in a PPR format. If it's a half PPR, I think you can go either way.
Henry's 6 in ECR, half PPR, by the way, and Drake is 10.
Yeah.
I want to say that we did not share these notes before the podcast because sometimes you do. Sometimes you let the stuff out before and you can kind of look it over. We didn't share any of these lists. And I love that you're bringing up Derrick Henry because he's somebody that I was going to talk about as being overvalued.
Yes.
And I love that you're talking about Kenyan Drake because we did a mock draft over on the Score last week. It was a 10-team league, and I had the number 1 overall pick. And in the end of the 2nd round at 20th overall, I took Kenyan Drake, and I got a hard time from people.
What?
People were giving me a hard
No,
time.
they
saying,
weren't.
Wow.
Why?
Yeah, I couldn't believe it. Kenyan Drake, I totally agree with you, Tags, that he's somebody, we saw what he did in the second half of last year. He could come out this year, be a top 10 running back for sure. I don't understand why anybody would be against it, and I'm totally with you moving up the rankings.
Man, that is nuts. I also like Joe Mixon above Derrick Henry. I'm with you guys on Derrick Henry being too high. Kenyan Drake, I've got him right there at 10, so I just, Tags, do you have him over Josh Jacobs, Nick Chubb, Joe Mixon?
Yes. Mixon, no, but I think you can
Okay.
make the argument that he should go above Mixon. You can, because they haven't.
I'm trying to keep Mixon out of my top 5. I just keep moving him up. He's one of these guys.
No, the player Joe Mixon is honestly, and I said this a while ago, and people now will agree with it, and they'll say it's not a hot take. It was a hot take last year, Bobby. I know that you heard me say it a million times. I said that Joe Mixon is just as talented as Le'Veon Bell, and everybody's like, no, he's not. That's a joke. He is uber talented.
I mean, for me, it's Saquon, and then Christian McCaffrey, and then Joe Mixon, maybe Kamara, and then a big gap.
I'd probably agree with you. I think in that take, as far as talent goes, Aaron Jones is somebody that I would actually view as up there as well. I think he's extremely talented, but Mixon he's underused in the passing game, and now they have even more mouths to feed. Burrow's there, so the offense should take a step forward. That's why I have Mixon at number 6 right now. I'm not going to move him top 5, but I'm just saying that you can make the argument that Drake should go as the 6th running back off the board. I really can make that argument.
That's interesting. Sorry for hijacking it and talking about Joe Mixon. Justin, let's move on to you, and you can give us a guy finally that you are low on.
Well, I mean, do we want to go into Derrick Henry? Do we need to go into Derrick Henry anymore? I feel like we've actually talked about this on this podcast, maybe after the season when I was on, but looking at Henry, this is more about where he's going in drafts, right? And he right now is going as like a top 5, top 6 option in half-point PPR drafts. And maybe he'll give a decent return on that. Maybe it will happen. We know
he might pass 20 receptions this year.
He could put up huge numbers, right? If he could do it for a full season, but we haven't seen him do it for a whole season at all. It's a guy who topped 90 rushing yards just once in his first 9 games last season. I know he went on the absolute tear, and it's that absolute tear that he goes on every year that's fresh in our minds, and I think gets him a little bit overdrafted. You know, they brought in Darrington Evans. He's going to be a perfect pass-catching complement to Henry, so you have to like that. I don't know that Henry, every year we talk about, well, maybe Henry will get a little more work in the passing game. I don't know that that's going to happen at any point here. So spending a first-round pick, maybe even a top 6 or top 7 pick overall on him, I think it's a bad idea. I think it's too much risk for me in the first round. And if you really like him, wait until he has a couple bad games early in the year and then try to go trade for him at that point and see if you can get him on your team for a little cheaper before that inevitable big run down the stretch comes.
I also think they throw the ball a lot more than they did last year. I mean, 24, 25 times a game once Tannehill took over. I don't really think that's sustainable. But here's the thing. We're talking about him as, you know, he struggled at the beginning of the season. He still finished as the RB number 2 in fantasy points per game for half PPR, tied with Dalvin Cook, ahead of Aaron Jones, Ezekiel Elliott, Saquon Barkley. He was that good.
But were there a lot of Henry owners that didn't even make the playoffs because they
you're
lost
exactly
early in the
right.
season, right?
Yes.
Like that's the kind of thing you have to factor in as well.
Yep, that's a really good point. All right, Tags, back to you, baby.
All right. ECR is too low on Todd Gurley.
Yes! I'm so glad you brought him up because you're right.
Well, I mean, I understand why people were worried about Todd Gurley last year coming into the year. You know, is he okay? Can he run the ball? And the Rams tried to decrease his role, and then they realized that's not worth it because Malcolm Brown just doesn't offer anything that Todd Gurley doesn't. And then they ended up going back to Gurley, and he looked good at the end of last year. I thought he looked terrible at the beginning of the year. I don't know if it's because they didn't give him the reps in the preseason, through training camp, whatever. But I thought he looked fine at the end of the year. The Falcons have no one else in that roster who could even compete with him. Brian Hill's not good. They've already given up on Ito Smith. They actually were demoting him down the depth chart as he got injured. So I'm not really worried about him. They didn't bring in anybody else. I'm not really worried about Todd. Like, as long as he's on the field, he's going to perform because that Falcons offense is going to be a top 6 scoring offense. They always are. The offensive line is going to be solid. Todd Gurley's never, I don't even know if obviously running behind the offensive line they had in LA last year, it was going to be tough for anybody, but Atlanta, he's not going to see a whole lot of 8-man fronts. It's not that he did with LA because McVay, the way he schemes, but.
Well, it seemed like 8-man fronts because the offensive line was so horrendous.
They were terrible. But that's what I'm saying. Like looking at over, the last 3 years, Falcons running backs have combined to average almost 1,400 rushing yards, 10 touchdowns on the ground, averaging another 600 yards and 5 touchdowns through the air. So it's like, you know, we'll mix in some other running backs, but as long as Todd Gurley's healthy, he's going to be ranked as an RB1 most weeks. So getting him around that RB, like he's being drafted, the ECR right now is RB16.
Right.
The ADP right now is RB21. That's stupid. Like, I would take Gurley over Austin Eckler personally.
I'd take him over Miles Sanders. I'd take him over Clyde Edwards-Helaire. Justin, where do you stand on Todd Gurley?
I'm right there with you guys. It's
All right.
stunning to me that they didn't bring anybody into the draft. I had him ranked as a high-end RB2, and I thought, you know what, once they draft a guy, I'm going to have to bump him down a little bit.
Yeah.
And then it never happened. And like Tag said, who is going to take touches away from him in that offense? And we saw last year. I think people can get over the expectation now that he's not a top 5 guy anymore. He's not the Gurley that we saw a few years back. But if he gets the volume, if he gets the scoring opportunities, which he did last year, he could still be a decent fantasy running back, a high-end RB2, maybe a low-end RB1. And Atlanta is a great landing spot for that. So absolutely, the volume there for sure bumps him still into that range.
They only threw the ball to him 31 receptions.
Yeah, that was
last year.
really
that could
odd.
double.
That was odd, the way they didn't use him in the passing game, and that's whatever. I think it could have been confidence building for Goff if they had used him more that way. And if you go back, that's when Goff was having his most success. But know what I find funny, guys, is that when people say running backs don't matter and that talent doesn't matter, but then they like, oh, Todd Gurley just sucks, I'm not going to draft him, when he's going to get all the opportunity that you possibly want. He is talented. He's still talented. And as long as he's on the field, like I said, I think he's an RB1.
Well, I mean, when they had the worst offensive line in football in 2016, he was the single least efficient running back. And then they upgraded their offensive line. He was the number 1 fantasy running back for 2 straight years. And then last year was a horrible offensive line. And what was he? He was one of the least efficient running backs. So I kind of do think that it doesn't matter as much as the scheme, the offensive line surrounding talent, man. All right, Tags, that was yours. Now we are back to you, Justin, and you get to give us a guy that you are low on.
Well, I'm going to go a little bit deeper to James White. His ECR right now is at RB33. I have no doubt that the Patriots are going to scheme up the offense. They're going to be more successful than people think, even if it's Jarrett Stidham under center. And there's going to be weeks where White has 8, 9 catches. But last year, he only finished as a top 20 fantasy back. When we're talking about half PPR, he only finished as a top 20 fantasy back 4 weeks of the season. So it goes back to that thing, like you said, Bobby, when you're talking about, Derrick Henry, what impact is that going to have on your team? If you have a guy where you're putting him out there and he's not giving you big weeks very often. Now, I view guys like White as, he's a good bye week fill-in. He's a good guy to throw in there if, you have injuries to your roster. But he's not someone that I really want to invest in. I want somebody with a little more upside, a guy who can potentially give me RB1 results, at least
that's
for a
what
longer
he did in 2018, though. He was a top 5 running back.
Right, but now we don't have Tom Brady there. And, maybe he's going to establish the chemistry with Jarrett Stidham, but he doesn't have that mind meld that he had with Brady. So I can't guarantee either. Stidham's a younger quarterback. He's a little more mobile. Maybe he'll rely on, running the ball a little bit more than checking down.
Yeah.
Even if they bring in somebody like Cam Newton, I'm not sure Cam Newton's the check down type either. So it makes White a pretty scary fantasy asset for me, for where you got to get him. And I think people look at it, even in PPR leagues, he's just not somebody that I'm that excited to have on my teams at that stage of the draft where you got to draft him, which is, the 8th round or so.
By the way, I exaggerated. I just looked, and he was the RB7 in 2018 half PPR league. So sorry about that, guys. Tags, what do you think about James White? Do you want shares of guys like him and Tariq Cohen, who could help you week to week, but really don't have a ton of upside?
Yeah, that's basically what they're there for. You have to understand how the rest of your roster is kind of put together and find out if there's a place for them on it. They're not going to be league winners. Absolutely not. I have James White as someone who is a little bit overvalued. I have him down at RB37. Tariq Cohen, RB39. So they're right in that same territory where it's like, guys, if you have them as a flex option, but you're stacked in a lot of other ways, but you need some stability in your lineup, I think those guys are fine, but definitely not going to rely on them for, RB2 consistent production.
Sure. I don't mind having guys like this on my roster. I think that they will probably, you talk about building your rankings for a draft and your rankings for the accuracy competition. They're going to help you in the accuracy competition when you rank them higher because that's where they're going to finish. James White was an RB22 last year. Tariq Cohen was an RB12 in 2018 as well. But in terms of week to week, how much they're going to help you in fantasy, not as excited about them. I'd rather draft 8 potential league-winning running backs, like you mentioned, Latavius Murray, Tony Pollard, Alexander Madison, and hope 3 of them turn out, right?
Mm-hmm. Pretty much.
All right, Tags, back to you for your last guy. This is somebody that you think is undervalued based on what we're seeing in early ECR.
I'm going to go with Ronald Jones. ECR has him at
knew you were going to say him.
RB40, RB40, and ADP has him at RB37. So the public is a little bit higher than experts are on him. I'm higher than both of them. I am not one to anoint Keyshawn Vaughn as the guy. Again, third, fourth.
Keyshawn Vaughn's 32.
That's where he's
Holy
being drafted.
cow, man!
I have Keyshawn Vaughn. I don't even want to say.
I like
have him.
Keyshawn Vaughn, but Jones is the starter for now.
That's how I view it, and it's a very it's a fluid situation where you have to kind of understand that things can change like rather quickly, and that's why I don't have Ronald Jones ranked higher than I do. I'm at 29. If I knew he was the starting job locked down, I'd move him up, into probably the top 25. But right now, it's like there is some volatility you have to bake into his price, and you have to accept that. But I don't know why people are automatically saying Keyshawn Vaughn is the guy out there in Tampa. We talked about him on the podcast the other day, so I don't want to go too far into this, but I'm curious, Justin, what's your take on this backfield? Because we saw Arizona draft David Johnson with Bruce Arians there in the 3rd round. David Johnson was like the most efficient running back in football that year, yet he had I think it was 131 touches that season. Bruce Arians is not a guy that just wants to lean on a guy that has little to no experience, and Keyshawn Vaughn wasn't someone who impressed me over the top when I was going through my scouting process. So what's your take on this Tampa Bay backfield?
I was fairly high on Vaughn actually, but I had him in that grouping that was below the top guys. Yep. And with the landing spot, I gotta say I do like him quite a bit here. Now I only have him at RB29, and I have Ronald Jones at RB39, and like you said,
ooh,
that could change quite a bit as we go here. But I think with Vaughn, I think he's going to have more of a pass-catching role. I don't think they're going to have, Dario Ogunbowale involved there, or even Calais, the rookie who they brought in. I think it's going to be Vaughn taking on that role. I think this is an offense that there's going to be a lot of scoring opportunities as well. I like Vaughn in that offense, but I'm fairly conservative, as you can see, on both of them, right? I'm not putting either in the RB2 range.
One of them is going to be a top 20 running back.
One thing I will say, though, is looking at Bruce Arians' offense, at least the historical data on it, we have to take that into account a little more this year, because last season I was someone who was like, no way, O.J. Howard is so good, they're definitely going to use him. And we learned, actually, that offense does not really want to use the tight end that much. So maybe you're right, Tags. Maybe it'll lean that way with the running backs as well.
So Ronald Jones right now is behind Damian Williams, Kerryon Johnson, the backup running back for the Lions. He's behind Jordan Howard, Phillip Lindsay. What? I mean, even Darius Geis and Cam Akers, I'd take him over.
There's a lot of guys that you just mentioned that I could see why the argument is. And Kerryon Johnson's a guy that I don't think he's going to fade away to nothing. I don't think he's a backup. I think that's going to be a timeshare between him and DeAndre Swift. And they're going to go whoever's got the hot hand. That's how I
don't
do that
want anything
backfield.
to do with that offense either.
Yeah, with Matthew Stafford under center, it's a lot better.
It's better.
So
the answer in the end for Tampa Bay's backfield might just be neither. Really, it might end up being a split, and maybe there won't be a guy that steps up.
Same thing with Detroit. It could be a very RB3 situation where it's they're both going to have RB3, RB4 value most weeks, and it's going to be tough to predict.
Mm-hmm. Yep. All right, we're to your last guy, Justin. Give us another guy that you think is overvalued right now.
Well, it's kind of anticlimactic to end this way, but we've already talked about every other guy I have. Yeah. We talked about Darius Geis. He's one of them. Talked about Rashad Penny. He was another. And then we touched on Tariq Cohen. I will say, though, with Tariq Cohen, the stunning thing for me is he's a guy that caught 79 passes last year, had over 100 targets, and he still just finishes the RB 38.5 point PPR league.
That's wild.
And if you bump it up to PPR, it was only the RB 28. So they've talked up David Montgomery getting more work in the passing game there. Nick Foles coming to town. Maybe he'll be a little more successful moving that offense downfield, sustaining drives if he wins the job. We have to, if he wins the job, of course. I know Tags likes Anthony Miller, as I do as well.
Yeah,
I think he's a breakout candidate, somebody who could get more work all year long, not just in the second half of the season like he did last year. So I think that was the best you're going to see from Cohen last season. I don't think his role is going to grow moving forward. So he's not somebody, and it kind of is just like the James White thing. And I'm not against pass-catching running backs, I will say that, but he's another guy that I'm not going to want to have on my rosters.
All right, Tags, what do you think about Tariq Cohen? Because I know you're higher on David Montgomery than most people, but I think there's room for both.
Yeah, Cohen is a guy that he just didn't break any big plays last year. The way
and
that
he's got to, right?
Yeah, he'd better. It comes down to Matt Nagy, and can he call the offense correctly? Because every single play that he designed for Cohen was running towards the sideline, which made absolutely zero sense. But again, it was just one of those things where the Bears offense was just a disaster last year, and I think we can only improve on that. But again, it just comes down to how you build your roster and what you're looking for. If you understand what Tariq Cohen is, where he's a guy that's typically going to get you, 8 to 12 PPR points, and if he starts breaking some of those big plays, you're going to get a lot bigger performances. I'm okay with someone like Tariq Cohen. I think he belongs in the territory with someone like Matt Breida.
All right. Okay, guys. Well, that's all for today's show. Justin, really appreciate you coming on.
Always appreciate you guys having me.
And you guys give Justin a follow on Twitter at his name, Justin Boone. I'm at Bobby Fantasy Pro, and Mike is at Mike Tagliere NFL. For Justin Boone and Mike Tagliere, I'm Bobby Sylvester. Thanks for listening, and enjoy your football.
Thanks for tuning in to the Fantasy Pros YouTube channel. Make sure to check out our featured videos as well. Also, make sure to click that red subscribe button to get notified when we post videos in the future.